Hello,
Hello,
Lee Jong-un at Books and Consumption.
this is Young Soo-jin from Books and Consumption.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Both of us have a somewhat low reading rate.
It's quite low?
Yes, I mentioned it last time. I really love buying books, but I can't finish reading them all. So the reason I started this channel is to read more thoroughly. That's the first goal.
To read diligently.
Yes. We were also doing a book club together, and it was better to discuss things there.
That's right. Since people with different thoughts and backgrounds come together, it's a place where various opinions are exchanged. So we thought, how about moving this online? That's how the two of us started.
That's right. It's a project that encourages book overconsumption. So, what shall we talk about today?
We have selected The Boy is Coming by author Kang.
It's precious.
That precious.
Currently sold out at bookstores.
I also couldn't get it because it's sold out, so I gave this book to my friend.
Is that how you come out?
Of course.
I was seeming I have it.
No. Our book is on the way. It arrived on the 22nd, but due to cancellations, this will be edited later, right? No. I will release all of this.
Are you saying you were trying to pretend?
That kind of thing doesn't work. Broadcasting has to be truthful. I started this because I wanted to choose a book I wanted to read. And personally, I do like reading. But I don't have any favorite Korean authors. I tend to be biased in my reading.
Today, biased reading is the answer.
Because I have a serious bias, I've read only a handful of novels by Korean authors. So, while we were wondering what our next book should be, didn't Kang win the Nobel Prize? So, I was curious about what kind of worldview and literary perspective one must have to win the Nobel Prize. And I thought, why not? Start with Kang's The Boy is Coming.
Yes, that sounds great. I was really happy when Suji suggested reading it. I heard that he won the Nobel Prize, but I didn't know much about it, which is a bit embarrassing for us as people who read books. Also, since many people around me have been talking about The Boy is Coming, I was glad when Suji mentioned it. The Boy is Coming consists of a total of 6 chapters. When I read The Vegetarian, I saw that it was made up of 3 short stories. So this kind of structure feels somewhat familiar to me. Various characters unfold their stories sequentially around a single event, and the narrator sometimes refers to the boy as you, and sometimes shares my story with an omniscient narrator's perspective appearing as well. As many people know, it talks about the events that occurred during the Gwangju Uprising. The first chapter begins with the story of a boy named Dong-ho, who was in the midst of the events during the Gwangju Uprising. At that time, there was Yun-soo, a high school senior, and Jin-soo, a college student who came down due to the school closure order. There is also Jong-dae, a friend that Dong-ho desperately searches for, who appears in the second chapter. This book gently weaves together the stories of these friends, reflecting on the day the event occurred, and how they endured and lived through the years, even 20 or 30 years later. Before we start talking in earnest, Suji, what did you think of this book?
It seems easy to have biases because of the Nobel Prize. Wow, that must be overwhelming. I started with that thought. But the book is overall very dark. The issue itself is quite heavy, so I was really worried. I was worried that I would feel very depressed while reading, but the overall expression was quite lyrical. It's like, while reading, sometimes I viewed it as a third party on the scene, and other times I became the protagonist experiencing the events. Because of this back and forth, it wasn't just the author, saying, "At this time, it was like this, and at that time, it was like that." But rather, I felt a lot of emotions personally.
That could be perhaps the author's capability.
I should say the expression was very simple. It was calm. In a way, it had a feeling similar to reportage, but it also had a way of making you feel overwhelmed. As I continued to read, it was difficult, but of course, many people cried a lot while reading the book. But I usually don't cry while reading books. However, this book really made many people cry, and I ended up sobbing as well.
I can't help but agree. Yes, Suji mentioned that it felt like being on site, and it's lyrical. There was also talk about winning the Nobel Prize, and as many know, the author of The River is also a poet who published a poetry collection. I learned that for the first time this time. There are many sentences that have a poetic feel, but when people think of poetry, they might imagine something lyrical and beautiful with adjectives like that. However, modern poetry is quite harsh. Whether calm or cold, it feels like witnessing a scene that evokes some poignant emotions, and within that, metaphors emerge. And there are poems that unfold as if the scenes are visible right in front of you. Since time and space shift rapidly, it sometimes feels fantastical. And I think I feel that sensation in Han Kang's novels. That's why it has even more of a sense of presence. After reading this book, I thought it would be nice to read Han Kang's poetry collection as well. I was really overwhelmed. While reading it, I cried at the beginning, and then I thought I should organize my thoughts for the broadcast, so I read it again and cried again. I usually cry a lot. I laugh a lot too, but I think I cried a lot this time. So, while commuting, on the subway, I felt a bit embarrassed, reading it because I was trying to act like I wasn't crying, but tears were streaming down. I really had to close the book and pretend nothing was happening. I remember pretending to have a cold and blowing my nose. Shall we talk about the first chapter? In the story of the young bird, it's the moment when Dong-ho sees the young bird, right after his grandmother passes away, as if a spirit is leaving. It has a subtitle about the spirit. I liked referring to Dong-ho as you. Earlier, Suji mentioned the expression of observing as a third party at the scene. Although we couldn't be there, we are closely watching Dong-ho from the side. So, I felt like I wasn't just a reader outside the book, but a witness to the events, which was nice.
I think that statement is accurate. A witness, yes. I felt like I was a witness, experiencing the scene. While reading, I noticed that the protagonist, Dong-ho, has quite a few expressions that show awareness of the situation. So, he's a third-year middle school student, right? 13, 15. A 15-year-old student wonders what on earth is happening in the situation unfolding before his eyes. Being in a situation where life and death are at stake, he personally saw something like a soul flying away at the moment of death. But what I saw at that time is now unfolding right before my eyes. In parts where this is expressed, I felt that this child is now experiencing death. And while observing the part where soldiers question why they sing the national anthem for the person they killed at the specific scene of the incident. In particular, I think this is a point where even someone without background knowledge about the Gwangju uprising can have questions about why and how the event occurred, and circumstances.
And in fact, we also received education that was somewhat rote and vague about modern history, so we stopped asking why.
Memorizing, since it was something that came from experience.
It's just that way, but by Dong-ho raising the question of why, we start to think, while reading or when looking at other events or different books. Yes, that was the case. I remember a scene from That Young Bird where my sister comes and gives me castella and yogurt. At that time, she would tap me on the shoulder from behind. I'll read that expression for you. It feels like a delicate touch, as if my fingertips are wrapped in layers of cold, nameless cloth. Isn't it so chilling? I mean, how did they come up with such an expression? It feels like it would make a rustling sound with layers of cold, nameless cloth, and it's very delicate, not just a simple touch from a person. This comes up again later. Oh, that art, when my friends Jung Dai and sister Jung Mi were living together at her house. I think it was that moment when Jung Mi asked, "If you have any first-grade books or textbooks, could you give me some?" It's a bit different when knocking, but the structure is the same. I'll read it for you. The knocking sound seems to feel like gentle fingertips wrapped in soft cloth. So, looking at this, the touch that made the knocking sound has changed to feel more trained, delicate, and more refined. I thought it might mean that Sister Jung Mi has passed away. The expression is so beautiful, and at the same time, it makes me very sad. The moment I realized that
It's the intersection of the memories one holds. Different situations unfold, and this also feels like the intersection of life and death that I mentioned earlier.
these two things, and there was that too. Oh, right. We say that. My late grandmother will be watching over me. Sometimes we think like that, but someone says, if the soul has no body, how can it open its eyes and watch over us?
That's right.
That's right. So, did the bodies lying in this funeral hall escape like young birds that flew out of grandmother's body? I think this is the various senses of the boy who faced death that Suji mentioned, which were his perspectives. That's how it's expressed.
So it feels really beautiful and captures the boy's innocence, which makes it even sadder. I think the saddest part was that he experienced this tragedy at such a young age. It's a brutally harsh reality, honestly. Experiencing something like that before your 20s is a time when a person undergoes tremendous changes in perception. To already feel the theme of life and death, which is something humans might ponder for a lifetime, seems like a very cruel reality.
Let's move on to the second chapter, Black Breath. This is the story of Jongdae. He is the same age friend I mentioned earlier who lived with Dongho. This is the scene where Jongdae and Dongho are pulling a dead body on a cart together. They are in the procession when they face the soldiers' ruthless attack, which is essentially an absurd attack on civilians. Unarmed. It's not like the soldiers confronted the unarmed civilians march head-on. Bullets are flying from rooftops. That's truly absurd. Dongho was very angry, but during that process he saw Jongdae get shot. However, at that moment, he ran away. Well, rather than saying he ran away, he avoided it somehow.
He ran away because he had to survive, but he did avoid it. And there are scenes where he expresses regret about that.
So, in the second chapter, it is revealed that Jongdae has died, and he appears as a spirit.
So I was very sad.
The spirit, a ghost post-death, tells its story first person. It cannot leave its body. With the setting of being bound like that, the ghost cannot sleep or close its eyes, and while continuously watching its decaying body, it gradually begins to see its own body as an object of hatred. It has come to hate its body that has lost its humanity.
It is simply expressed as a chunk of meat.
At the same time, I found these words very poignant and painful. Why did you kill me? Why did you kill my sister? How did you kill her? The why arises when a person faces difficult situations leading to anger. It may vary with each hardship, such as getting sick, being suddenly fired from work, or when a loved one suddenly breaks up. The question why emerges. Why did I get this illness?
Oh, why me now?
Why are you trying to break up with me? Why is the company doing this to me? I'm doing well at work. Falling into the black hole of why me makes it difficult to escape from trauma if one cannot find answers to that question, whether from external or internal sources. So, when Jongdae asks why, it is a story directed at this society. If our society does not realize, discuss, and comfort the fact that the innocent boy died, individuals will not be able to escape that outside and will carry trauma and pain. I thought that society would be the same, and it reminded me of my own personal struggles, which made my heart ache.
That's right. This part, especially in Jongdae's dialogue, needs more memory. We must continue to remember it so that it doesn't end too quickly. This is how we express it. Let's not forget about this incident. It felt as if the writer was telling us that we need to remember, regardless of how it is. The black sun part is where the spirit tells us a story. This is a reality that happened. So I would even express it as a tragedy. It resonated with me as a reminder that this tragedy should not happen. So we must remember.
So Jongdae struggles, while continuously remembering the good memories of the time when he was a person and human. So then, the soldiers come and burn the corpses all at once. After that, the connection between the training and the corpses weakens, and they float into the air. At that moment, they can go anywhere. Then, they start to ponder. Should I go to my sister? But I don't know where she is, so I can't go. Should I go to the people who killed me? I don't know where they are either. Then let's go to where Dongho is. He should be in the city, so I just need to follow that light. I wish I could have gone like that, but in reality, I can't leave. I can't depart because there's still blood flowing from my eyes. I think this connects to what was said earlier. I can only move when I remember and when the blood no longer flows from my eyes. So, as long as I don't recover, I can't move forward. Jungdae is talking about that. I think there is still blood flowing from Jungdae's eyes, which made it a bit difficult for the 15 or 16-year-olds to read.
I think it's about Han, which is one of the most Korean emotions. Since there is still a lingering spirit, it seems to be a chapter that makes us think we should do something to resolve some grievances. I think it was a chapter that made me feel that by acknowledging and recognizing that such events occurred, we might be able to alleviate some of the Han. I think the most important message was that we need to know. That's how I felt while reading. The next chapter is titled 7 Slaps, where Yoon Seung, after getting a job at a publishing company years later, is interrogated while searching for a wanted translator and receives 7 slaps. This is a story that meticulously compiles events that transpired over a week, during which the protagonist experiences censorship of plays and books, reminiscent of the May 18th incident, narrating their personal experiences, scene by scene in a way that feels very cinematic, in a detailed manner, and vividly. As each slap unfolds, their memories spread out, and with each subsequent slap, another scene emerges, making it feel like a movie. Though it is a novel, each scene vividly comes to mind.
In fact, the 2 slaps represent the second day, and the 3rd slap represents the 3rd day. So I see how it can feel cinematic when imagined that way. One part that left an impression on me is when a scene appears that quotes excerpts from a paper from somewhere else. Humans inherently possess both barbarism and sublimity, and when these traits are expressed through the power of the crowd, the basis for this manifestation is still unknown. The issue is that the crowd is barbaric, leading to the expression of barbarism, and it does not mean that the crowd as individuals is more sublime, resulting in the expression of sublimity. Then, on one hand, I thought, isn't it the fault of individuals? But, upon further reflection, that's not the case. We also have sublimity within us. Since there is also barbarism, we have the ability to choose. It is mentioned in the epilogue as well, where there is a part about soldiers who are weak-hearted. Whether it's shooting a gun into the sky, or secretly taking an injured person to the hospital and fleeing, ultimately, we have choices. This leads to the contemplation of what I should choose to be human. Of course, despite that, the same thing happens, and if I were Yunsuk, or if I were Dong-ho, I think I would have hidden in the attic at home like Yunsuk. I also feel that this could be a very selfish thought.
They say that in the worst situations, the true nature of a person is revealed. Regardless of right or wrong, it is a natural human instinct to take action in order to survive and ensure our continued existence. Instead of judging whether that choice was right or wrong, I think it's important to consider, what would I have done in that situation, in any given situation? It's about putting yourself in that person's position and thinking it through. Yes, that's right.
Anyway, I don't want to awaken barbarism as much as possible. What was truly impressive here was the theatrical scene that unfolded almost like a different story. There are lines that were censored, so the actors just move their lips. That is also very heartbreaking, unable to speak. It's inexpressible. Yes, here, an old woman appears, and a boy holding a skull comes out. That skull is taken by someone else and passed from hand to hand until it reaches the old woman. And there is a scene where the old woman slowly and quietly crosses the stage holding the skull, and at that moment the boy sticks closely to the old woman's back. It's as if he is calling out Dong-ho in his heart. So I felt this scene was like Dong-ho's funeral, where Dong-ho's body is handed over to the family, and it seemed like a process of sadly sending him off. And there is a scene where Suji expresses that she was deeply moved by it.
There was a part that gave me chills while reading it. It's very lyrical, but as I read it, I thought, how can this be expressed like this? Let me read it. After you died, I couldn't hold a funeral, and my life became a scene of mourning. Similar expressions continue to appear later. I think this part was somewhat overwhelming while reading. In any case, they are loved ones who are left behind as family, as they have departed. After that, they depict how their lives have changed in a very calm manner, and the expressions are so subdued that I think it made me feel very sad while reading. Here, there's also a line that I'll read again. After you died, I couldn't hold your funeral, and my eyes that saw you became a temple. My ears heard your voice, became a temple. My lungs inhaled your breath, became a temple. I felt very sad, even while reading these parts. It was so desperate, and I kept thinking that I hope such a tragedy never happens again.
However, even now, wars are happening somewhere on Earth. This cycle continues, and so when the Han River author said, "Is it time to celebrate this?" It seems that for a writer who has interviewed such pain and violence, and has witnessed it firsthand, and written it into a novel, it wouldn't have been easy to dare to celebrate.
So, while reading that part, I understood that feeling.
I'll move on to the next chapter. It doesn't seem easy to talk about. As I discuss the parts that were good at the time, there are moments when emotions rise, making it increasingly difficult as I go further back. Yes, as I go further back, it talks very specifically about the brutal scenes. When we say, yes, we were tortured, everything gets lumped together. However, when it shows the actual scenes of what happened, rather than just telling that torture occurred, we find ourselves in that moment and feel that pain directly. In this chapter, Jinsu's story comes up, but Jinsu does not appear. The story of a man who was captured and tortured alongside Jinsu comes up. Jinsu survives, but Despite enduring torture, he cannot bear the agony and ends up dying. This is the story of that man after hearing the report. The format is that of an interview with someone who is writing a thesis.
The dynamic nature of the changing formats and perspectives in each chapter makes it engaging, avoiding being too much like a novel or a news article. This variety allows for a captivating read and enhances the sense of presence. One of the parts that particularly gave me chills in this chapter, Sehwapi, is when the character recalls their torture while thinking of a Mon Ami pen. I have many Mon Ami pens at home, but I feel I can't use them. I apologize to Mon Ami pens, but that was one of the scariest aspects. A pen, which is an everyday object that just rolls around the house, becomes a medium that connects reality and the past because of the fact that it was used for torture. It vividly expresses the extent of the trauma they carry, which is, in a way, that extremely frightening. They are still living within that trauma. The expressions throughout the reading made me constantly think about how terrifying it must have been for this person, Jin Soo, who ultimately could not sleep without sleeping pills, and continued his life through alcohol, eventually letting go of life. It felt like there was no other way for him.
One of the expressions of that pain is described as the eyelid sticking and not being able to detach, meaning that even when the eyes are closed, they can still see it, because it is stuck to the inside of the eyelids, making it impossible to escape. Imagining such expressions was very difficult. While reading, violence tramples on everyday life. The Mon Ami pen is one example, and later, the second university is mentioned, which was filled with good memories of playing ball. But in reality, it was a hell from which they wanted to escape. That scene also comes to mind.
Later, after being released from torture, they found out that the place was indeed that place.
And among their mentions, there is this statement. I am fighting. I fight alone every day. I fight against the hell of having survived, of still being alive. I fight against the fact that I am human. I fight against the thought that only death is the only way to escape from that reality. How difficult it must have been.